creatures of the night? It's your girl Tati. I just finished watching Who Killed WCW. It's on Vice TV. Same people who does Dark Side of the Ring. But we do have The Rock executive producing this, and he's also on here as well. This was actually pretty interesting. I would say this. One thing that threw me off about this was there's no narrating going on. And I had to remind myself, this is not Dark Side of the Ring. This is something completely different. Them talking about wrestling. So don't look at it to be something similar to Dark Side of the Ring. Another thing here is that we had a lot of people here. And we had Eric Bischoff, obviously. We had Medusa. We had Booker T. We had Bill Goldberg. We had Conan, Kevin Nash, DDP, Kevin Sullivan. There might be more people as we go along because this is a 4-part series. So we started off with the first part tonight, and then every Tuesday until the last part, there'll be a new episode. Hour long, which is not bad at all. And I am watching this, and I'm just like, there is a key player that would never have agreed to be on this shit, and that is Hulk Hogan. His motherfucking ass would never get involved in something like this, because when we're talking about the topic of who killed WCW, I know maybe majority of people would say, not just pointing fingers at Eric Bischoff, but to say that he and Hulk Hogan was basically partners in crime in this whole situation is definitely true in this sense. Now, we're doing interviews, and for the most part, you're going to hear Eric Bischoff talking about this. So they kind of skip over a bit of the Jim Crockett stuff and go straight into, the whole world championship wrestling thing. And that's okay. For me, I kind of felt like in terms of this show, we moved pretty quickly. By the end of the episode, we were pretty much covering 1997. I was just like, oh, well, we got 3 more parts after this. How are we taking the pacing of this? But we'll see how it goes. Like I said, I don't want to look at it like Dark Side of the Ring. This is a different vibe for anybody who's curious about how the show is different from Dark Side of the Ring. Now, Eric Bischoff, he talks about how he's trying to get some opportunities to work with Vern Gagne, but then he ends up landing a job at AWA. He's working there for 2 years, and those last 6 months or so, he's not even getting a dime. A lot of people aren't getting paid. And, this is around the time where a lot of territories had already died out. And, AWA being one of the few last standing ones during that time. And he has a family. He still wants to be part of the wrestling business, but he's not making any money. So Larry Zbyszko calls him up and he said, hey, bruh, get your butt over to WCW. They're looking for announcers. Now, he ends up coming over to WCW, and he says he's happy. Things are much better than what it was at AWA. So now things are looking better in terms of his career being in pro wrestling. Now, we have Ted Turner, who knows the importance of pro wrestling, obviously buying Jim Crockett Promotions. And the crazy thing about it is that the executives are just like, pro wrestling, bro, is this the 80s? Is this the 70s? Well, we're over pro wrestling. They did not want that to be part of the network. They absolutely hated it. Now, Ted Turner is hanging on with WCW. However, it wasn't helping that they were literally losing $10+ million a year. And it got to the point where Ted is getting frustrated too, because now, regardless of how he feels about pro wrestling, he's a businessman. He needs to be making some money. And he already got these executives up to his fucking neck about how they're not making any profit. So now Ted is just like, hey, I'm going to give this 1 more year. If we're not making profits or things are not being significantly better with WCW, I'm going to just have to pull the plug. So then we get to the point where not too long after that, we have Eric Bischoff, who becomes one of the executive producers. And even Booker T, who's on the show, was just like, that was definitely the best decision that they could have made during that time in order to take WCW to a place that they've never been. Now, they weren't doing so great in terms of having an audience or whatnot. So Eric Bischoff, one of the first things he implemented with WCW was taking the show and taping them at Disney MGM Studios. So in this case, like everybody and their mama goes to Disney every single day. You always have people coming in and out. People are going to stop to want to watch these shows. He can be able to film, a lot of content with wrestling because there are people who's going to be there, and it always looks like it's a full house. So that worked. However, he realized he needed more. So now it's 1994, and Eric Bischoff was just like, all right, we're making improvements, but I need a star power here. I need somebody to bring to WCW that is not only going to have that star power, but we need that person to bring more eyes on over to WCW. So who does he think of? Hulk Hogan. The whole steroid trials and all that shit had already done, came and went. And Hogan was just sitting at home. He's doing movies and shit like that. And it's just, all right, he's not wrestling. Maybe if we can get him to come to WCW, that would definitely help because Hulk Hogan already had that legendary status so early on in his career. So now he calls Ric Flair because he's just like, all right, if I call Hogan, Hogan's gonna fucking hang up on me because he doesn't even know who I am. He asks Rick to call Hogan and to give him a call about joining WCW. Now Hogan calls Eric while he's sleeping. Eric answers the phone and he's like, you know something, brother? I heard that you were looking for me. And then obviously the rest is history. They are talking about contract negotiations. Hogan is like, hey, I want 4 pay-per-views per year. And here's the catch, the big catch, is that he wants creative control over his career. Now, for those of you who are not wrestling fans or who just don't understand what the problem is with that, is the big issue, and this is an issue that I feel like is going on in AEW right now, is that active wrestlers should not be able to have any creative control over what goes on in the company. That's supposed to be the job of the creative team. If you want to put input in things, that's cool. But when you're saying, I want 100% control over what happens with my character, what you end up doing in this big ass, world of professional wrestling where everybody has an ego to the fucking ceiling, what you do is you take opportunities from other people because you're constantly just looking out for yourself. I truly believe that this is an issue with some people in higher places in AEW right now, but we're not talking about that right now, but you get what I'm saying. So then, he comes on over and it actually works. People do still care for Hulk Hogan. He's still marketable. He can still bring people over. However, it's still not enough. WWF is doing really, really well, and WCW can't necessarily compete. So now it's 1995, and Eric has his very first, it was so funny, first meeting with Ted Turner after he's already been there for a few years, which is crazy. And then we have some executives from the network who are also there in this meeting. And then Ted Turner was just like, bruh, what can we do so that we can compete with WWF? And Eric, he's quiet at first, and he's like, I could tell him the lie, I could tell him the truth, I could just say I don't know. But he ends up telling him, he says, you know what? Their biggest advantage is that they are on prime time on Monday night. And when he says that, he's not thinking much of it, but he didn't realize that Ted was going to say, all right, well, let's put WCW on that same time as well. Put them prime time on Monday night. So now Eric is shaking in his boots because he didn't realize that it was going to go this way. So now he's got to figure out, well, when we get this time slot, what am I going to do to be able to compete with WWF? Now, there was an advantage here. WWF, during this time, their Monday Night Raws were taped. So what that means is they were taped. People already knew what the results were. And it was easy. Well, I want to say Not as easy as it is now, but it was like, all right, it already happened and that stuff can get leaked out. Now, what he thought would be a better idea, and which I do agree too, is to have a live show where things are unpredictable. You don't know necessarily what's going to happen. Yes, you have a card and you have these matches that you have for the show, but people don't necessarily know where you're going with the show. So here they have WCW Nitro, and he wants to have people obviously tune in, especially at the same time as people would be watching WWF. However, they know they don't have a big crowd like that, so they end up having a huge show at Mall of the America where it actually became a success. Like, they didn't even really need to fetch out for people. You see a wrestling ring in the middle of a mall, a really popular mall, by the way. People are stopping and looking to see what happened, and they want to get in on the action. So it turned out to be really, really successful. However, Hulk Hogan at this point was already starting to lose popularity. People starting to boo him. People was just like, we don't care about this motherfucker. We want other people. Like, people weren't seeing Hulk Hogan to be that. You know how they saw him when he was Vince McMahon boy toy back in the 80s. So it was a huge difference in terms of Eric Bischoff kind of underestimating that they can continue to have that same Hulk Hogan aura about him in WCW. I mean, like, many years had already passed by. 10 years or plus had already passed by, but he was still thinking that Hulk Hogan could draw that same type of feeling out of people. And that wasn't the case. And they had to make some changes if they wanted WCW to be just as successful as WWF. Now, fast forward, we have an invasion of sorts with Scott Hall, Kevin Nash. They are the outsiders. And this is very, very interesting. These are people that, well, you're looking at them and you're just like, holy shit, what the fuck is Diesel and Razor Ramon doing up in here in WCW? People were obviously curious on what was going on. These are obviously two really big names to jump ship from WWF to WCW. Now, here we have Eric Bischoff, who's just like, okay, there needs to be a third man in this group. For weeks, he is stalking our boy Steve Borden and saying, hey, Sting, we want you to turn heel. Can you turn heel? He's stalking him for a few weeks and trying to see what he can get out of him. Sting not with it. He don't want to be part of any of this foolishness. So then he has no other choice, and he goes on to Hulk Hogan, and he obviously pitched the idea to Hulk Hogan about turning heel. Now, Hogan obviously agrees to this. However, even Eric Bischoff is kind of like, okay, I'm not sure if he's actually going to do this. This is going to be really different for Hulk Hogan, who's obviously never been heel. He's always just been that mega baby face that everyone know and love him to be. It's just that things have gone stale. And when it gets to that point, your best case scenario is to turn that person heel and see how things go. Now, even up until that moment where he ends up turning heel in the ring, Eric Bischoff is still shaking and just like, okay, I don't know if he's actually going to do it. Let's see what's going to happen. And he actually does it. And obviously using someone like Macho Man, that really, really helped in that moment. They got the exact reaction that they wanted out of the fans. And it was very surprising, obviously, to the people who was there live. And then the people who are at home are just like, whoa, Hulk Hogan, heel? Holy shit. Now, they obviously become the NWO. And Eric, he realizes like, okay, we're doing something different, but doesn't realize how big it is. And it actually turns out to be super popular. I mean, who was not fucking with the NWO during this time? Like, they were so mega popular. And then Eric was like, one of the things that helped him truly realize how popular that they were was when his son came home one day and he was just like, hey, Dad, can you give me a couple of NWO shirts? My friends really, really love them. And that's when he realized that, holy shit, okay, we got something really, really good going on. Of course, he gave his son a little t-shirts to get to his little friends. And, from there, he realized that, we really got to take this head on and make this the biggest thing in WCW. And he says that he believes that the NWO itself was like 80% of the growth of WCW. Like, without that probably, who knows what would have happened to WCW even earlier on in that stage. Now, that is a huge thing that ends up helping WCW obviously grow and be even more, I guess you could say, popular than WWF. They started also adding like reality to the show itself, where it's just like, it felt like at the end of the night, when you saw something, you're just like, hold on, let me check out the news and see what's going on. Like, they had this thing, I forgot what it was. It was in 1996, and we had Jimmy Hart. Jesus Christ! He runs up to the ring. He runs up to the camera, and he's just like, "Oh, something's going on backstage. Y'all guys gotta come." This was during the time, I think Benoit, Luger, Ric Flair, can't remember who else. Like, a multi-man match is going on in the ring, and he is calling these guys to help because something's going on in the parking lot. Now, the cameraman ends up going out there, and they're filming everything, kind of like how you see things are with reality shows nowadays, which is stuff you didn't really see back then in the middle of the 90s. And in this case, you have everybody who was in character, well, almost everybody in character, selling that the NWO just attacked all these people. Arn Anderson laid out, and we have Nancy Benoit, who had an Oscar award winning performance, holding on to Arn Anderson, and she's crying, and she's making it seem like Arn is like seconds away from death. We also had Kevin Nash, who throws Rey Mysterio onto the trailer, and Kevin Nash even said that originally Rey Mysterio told him to throw him through the fucking window of the trailer, and then Kevin Nash was like, "Bitch, I'm not crazy. I'm not gonna do that. I'll throw you at the trailer wall, but I'm not gonna throw you through the window." So that ends up happening and whatnot. It was absolutely fucking brutal. And then you see all these women are crying. Miss Elizabeth and Nancy, they're crying. Men laid out in the parking lot. It was just like, it was something different that you didn't see before, because now it looks like something really real happened. And then this, when you add that element of reality to pro wrestling, which I feel like you can't really do nowadays in 2024, because everybody just already know what's real and what's not. But back then, it was so easy to really manipulate things in a way where fans really believed something was going on. And obviously, we had the NWO make a getaway into their limo, and here's Macho Man on the top of the limo while they're driving off. It was wild, absolutely wild. And the ambulance came, and they're getting people put in the stretchers, Rey Mysterio, all this stuff. It was really, really cool moment. Yeah, it's probably on YouTube. But what was interesting about that was that element of reality really, really sold people into believing that something really true happened. And that's what makes people tune in the next week so that they can see what happened. And that really worked. And that helped bring that 83 weeks of WCW winning the rating wars against WWF. Now, fast forward, we do have our Crow Sting character, which was a huge success, one of the most iconic characters in pro wrestling. He is obviously feuding with NWO, and they're leading onto this feud. This is more of a long-term feud, not just to like the next pay-per-view or the next one. They're literally dragging this out to Starrcade 97. Now, this obviously is a good thing. Tony Khan, do you hear that? We could take storylines and drag them out and really tell a story. And that's what they did. People, obviously, up to that point of Starrcade 97, they're really invested into this story, and they want to see what the outcome is going to be. So now, here we are, the day of the pay-per-view, and Eric Bischoff and Hulk Hogan and Steve, they're all in the room, and they're still discussing how the finish is going to go for this match. Now, Eric Bischoff says that the whole time, Sting was just sitting there, and he really just didn't really seem happy about anything. And he just had this face where it was just like he was over it. Now, by the time the meeting was over, Eric, Hulk are the only two in the room. And Hogan's just like, you know what, brother? That doesn't work for me. Let's do this. And then they end up doing whatever the hell that Hogan said he wanted to do after Sting had already left that room. Now, they end up calling Bret Hart. They tell Bret Hart that he's going to be the special guest referee after getting involved and punching out the referee and all this foolishness. And Bret Hart's like, what the fuck does that do with me? Like, why would I want to do this? But he wants to keep his job. He the checks had cleared, so he did what he was told to do, and he thought it was really stupid. Now, the crazy thing about it was that, yes, Sting ended up winning that match and winning the title. Everybody was happy about that. However, what ruined the whole thing was the actual finish. And once again, this is very important with pro wrestling. The finish fucking matters every match. It really does, especially after you done told a long-term story. And it's something that people are super invested in, like Sting versus Hulk Hogan. People were very invested in this, and then you give a really weird ass finish to the match. And it's just like, you thought that just Sting winning this was just enough, when really how he wins is also just as important. And they lit his ass up in the, AOL chat rooms back in the day. And then Eric Bischoff said till this day, people still get at him for that, ending or whatnot. Now, it's 1997. WWF, they got the ball, and they picking up in business. They're doing so much more better. And we're at the point where even WCW wrestlers are at the fucking live tapings watching WWF in the back, because why is a better show? It's more interesting. And they started to feel some type of way, like, holy shit, what's going to happen with WCW? I don't know, because WWF is definitely looking like the better product. Now, the end of episodes ends up with them asking what killed WCW. And what really, I don't want to say surprise. What ended up happening here is Eric took it back to when the whole Starcade thing, with, him, Sting, and Hogan in the room. And he was saying, Sting, he seemed to be really disappointed regardless of whatever we said in the room before the pay-per-view. It's almost as if he manifested that Hulk Hogan was going to just choose whatever he wanted to do for that match. And that word manifest, I was just like, what the fuck do you mean he manifested it? What happened was, Steve's not stupid. He knew exactly how Hulk Hogan and you roll. So he already knew that it was pointless for him to even agree or disagree with whatever you guys were saying in that room. Because at the end of the day, Hulk Hogan had 100% creative control over his career. So would it have mattered? No, he didn't manifested nothing. He already knew about y'all bullshit, because y'all been doing it all along. So now it goes back to who killed WCW. Almost everybody who answered at the end of the episode said Hulk Hogan, with Eric Bischoff and his little puppet strings, because that's what it was. Hulk Hogan had Eric Bischoff by the strings and helping him do whatever it was in his career. And that's an absolute God honest truth. And then we ended the show with Eric Bischoff going to say, oh, it's the network. The network, if they would have allowed me to do this, if they didn't do this, then we would have still been around. And I'm just like, this is your answer always. This is always has been Eric Bischoff's answer about the network. Does that play a role? Absolutely. I do think it does. But for him to actually say, yes, Hulk Hogan had me by the jawstrings and I was just doing whatever the fuck he wanted me to do. Why can't you just admit that? Everybody already knows it, and he just seems not to want to admit that. Now, guys, this was actually a great episode. I feel like we moved really quickly to 1997, but next episode, which is the second part out of 4, there seems to be a big emphasis on the Attitude Era, so that's definitely going to make things interesting and probably slow things down a little bit in terms of the timeline. So we'll see what happens with that. Having The Rock on here is really interesting because he's on the opposite side of things in terms of WCW. And then having certain people not being part of this, like obviously Ric Flair, they didn't ask you to be on, so he's been crying about that. Sting would have been a nice touch to have on this. I'm trying to think, like, who's still with us that would have helped. Paul White would have been another one. Tony Schiavone, like, there's a lot of people who are still alive and kicking that I really wish could have been part of this. This would have been really interesting to hear other people's opinion on this. And Hulk Hogan, as much as I would love to hear his opinion, I think he would have fucking be lying the whole fucking time and not really being truthful. So I don't think we probably would have gotten a good interview out of his ass anyway. But guys, thanks so much for watching my review. I will be back next week with part 2. Things are definitely getting interesting. So if you have not seen it, go ahead and see it. I do think is worth the watch. I'll see you guys then. Bye.